I'm here today, very, very proud to have John Cherry with us today, who is a farmer and the founder of Groundswell Agricultural Festival, Conference, Regenerative Agricultural Conference. What's the title of Groundswell?
Well, I know it changes all the time. I mean, I suppose it's we call it a show and conference, but it's it's
a meeting of minds.
Meeting of minds, and get together for all the regenerative farmers out there. Yeah.
So, obviously, this is the first podcast in the series I'm doing for regenuary, and
right.
Regenuary is a sort of month-long campaign that we at the Ethical Butcher run, really with the intention of sort of breaking down some of the narratives around the impact of food production, as well as wanting people to broaden their minds, broaden their horizons, explore some ideas, and stop thinking in absolutes that one thing is inherently worse than another or better than another. And I really mean that from every angle that we can possibly come at it. We need to be able to discuss the nuances of production, of the impact the production has on the food we eat. But if you could maybe take us back, because I've only been involved in this world for 2 or 3 years, but you are, possibly have. Well, I know you've been involved in it quite a bit longer than that, but you're possibly like at the very early stages of what we would now consider to be regenerative agriculture. So would you just take me back to your journey and where it started and where you came from?
Well, yes. I mean, it all starts a long time ago. But we've been farming since my brother and I since the mid '80s, I suppose, and it's I started off with idealistic ideas of how we could go organic and do the rest of it, and I realised it was slightly too complicated for my little brain. But I've always been worried about the effect that farming, conventional farming, the sort of industrial model of farming, has on the soil in particular, but on the land, and the products we produce aren't really as nutrient dense and as good as they could be, and they come at an enormous ecological cost of in terms of energy put into the amount of energy you get out in the food and all the rest of it. But being a little bit lazy, I carried on doing what I was doing until I came across farmers who were what we would now describe as regenerative, but then they were really, I suppose they were sort of no-till farmers.
Okay.
And so no-till is, because we're mostly arable farmers and we have some permanent pasture, so we're a mixed farm in a sense, but it tended to be two separate enterprises. On the permanent pasture we'd have some animals, and the rest of the land we'd plough up and grow wheat and stuff.
Just to throw in, just to sort of clarify some terms there, but permanent pasture is literally year after year after year, it's kept as pasture with animals on it. And then the arable, all on the same farm. So I know that because we buy beef from you, so I know that you do both, but all on the same farm, you then have other land that is only growing crops year after year after year, and you're not mixing the two. Is that the traditional system?
Well, the traditional system, I suppose, yes. It depends how far back you want to go with your traditions, but a lot of the
or the modern way,
the modern way, exactly. I mean, it's since the last Second World War, we've convinced ourselves that we don't need to look after the soil that well. We can buy solutions in a bag or a bottle, and
so you're talking about artificial fertilizers, right?
Artificial fertilizers.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was developed almost by accident after the Second World War, when somebody spilt munitions on the ground which were rich in nitrate, and then noticed that everything grew. And of course they had a huge amount of these unused nitrogen-based explosives basically, and somebody discovered that actually if you spread it on the land, things grow quicker, and that was almost the sort of beginning of the end, as it were.
Well, I think it was even the first war. I'm not sure. I mean, but it really kicked off after the Second World War, because we had there was a massive food shortage. We couldn't grow enough in the UK here, and we were.
I said it's to do with the shortage as well.
Well, I mean, so there was the Agriculture Act of 1946, and it was all about trying to ramp up local production, so we never again had to rely on convoys from America and all that kind of thing.
Got you.
So and there was a green revolution, they called it. It was all about growing an awful lot more wheat and short. It was all very exciting, and the government was pumping money into farming, and farmers did very well, and we grubbed out the hedges and made bigger fields and grew more and more wheat. And unfortunately, it seemed to sort of feed the beast rather than feeding the people, and farmers became sort of commodity producers for big business, and which is where we've got to a stage now that 50% of the food people eat is ultra-processed food. It's come out of a factory rather than out of a farm.
Talking about then, which you had, you said like in the 80s you decided to try and move away from. They were relatively recent then. It's not long that we were doing this sort of very industrial mechanized style of farming then. We're talking maybe 40, 50, 60 years before that.
Yeah.
So that's quite a lot of damage in a short time.
It is, but I mean, I think the damage has been going on for, since Neolithic times, really. Right. I mean, it's fascinating. The land of milk and honey that is talked about in the Bible, in the Middle East, is mostly desert now. But it's been over-farmed, over-grazed, or ploughed and eroded away. And North Africa, the breadbasket of the Roman Empire, is Libya and places. It's all desert. It's and humans are very good at messing things up. But the problem is now we're doing it on a global scale, and we need to be able to feed ourselves. But
okay, so
I'm getting completely off.
No. But this is good sort of groundwork, as it were. But let's backtrack now. So you and your brother. In the 80s, conventional, mostly arable, little bit of
so a few cattle on the permanent pasture.
And you mentioned drilling and tilling. Can you just explain what those two are and why and what the differences are there?
Well, it's we were ploughing in the 80s. We were ploughing our ground up. So the moldboard plough. You dig into the ground and turn the top sort of 6 to 8 to 10 inches upside down.
Right.
And then you have another series of different sort of pudding stirrers and harrows and things that create a seed bed. Yeah. So you smash up all the soil, and then you plant you make nice little seed bed, and plant your seeds all in a row, and then it all grows in the soil, and then you put a bit of fertiliser on, a bit of spray, and then you combine it, and then you sell it to the grain dealer. And
without asking a stupid question, why do we plough? What's the purpose? If all you need to do is
no, it's an incredibly good question, and it's one that people don't ask themselves. And there's a fellow, and I can't now remember his name, William Faulkner. No, can't was it? Anyway, he wrote a book called Plowman's Folly in America in 1940 something, and he was worried about it I think when he was at school in the 1910s. He kept asking everyone, why do we plough? And no one could come up with a good answer, but he developed a system of farming without ploughing, because he says, madness. I mean, it's incredibly energy intensive turning the whole thing upside down. But if you've only got an ox to do it, you really don't do it unless you have to. But basically they were doing it to control the weeds and to give the plant a head start. But crucially also, if you disturb the soil, you let the air in, and it breaks up the humus, the lovely brown stuff, and releases nutrients. So you get a head start.
There is a purpose. So it is kind of reinvigorating to some
degree.
But
it's degenerative. You're starting off with a lovely kind of chocolate cake soil, and you're eroding it, or you're evaporating it in effect. And after, but it happens quite slowly. So. And we got to the stage of in the 1980s and 90s, our soils were getting harder and harder to do anything with, because all that lovely organic matter had turned into carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. You know, it's
I've got you. And so, because I remember, like, you know, in my early days of involvement with this business, when I was, you know, I came to see you and a few other farmers who'd be our suppliers, and one of them that I went to see, a guy called Neil Harley, and he was converting arable into pasture, and he took me onto 2 fields either side of the road, so there's no variance in terroir, if you like. And one field, I picked up a handful of soil, and it was like brown, like light tan-coloured brown sand, and the field on the other side, it was like dark brown, like this table, and I was like, that's purely land management that's made the two different. So, okay, so ploughing, it helps the new plants get to new nutrients, but it's very destructive. So you're accelerating how quickly the nutrients are being pulled out of the soil, and you're exposing it to runoff and being dried out and things like that. What's drilling, and how is it different?
Well, drilling is drilling is purely the business of putting the seed, is sowing the seed in the ground. So it's
so you use drilling even if you've ploughed then? Yeah.
So you and Jeff Notill, bless him, not the one-legged flautist, but I can't think what he was, but he invented the first seed drill, and it was a machine pulled by horses.
We should have been called Jeff Notill, really.
He should have been Jeff Notill. Yes, exactly. But you know, what changed the game for us was realising that there was such a thing as a no-till drill. Till is to till is to cultivate the ground. We got away from ploughing about 20 years ago, and we were doing minimal cultivation or minimum tillage.
So minimum disturbing that top
layer.
So
we thought it was minimum. We had huge machines which kind of scarified up the top, 4 or 5 inches, and then we got shallower and shallower, and then after a bit we realised we didn't have to do anything. We didn't have to disturb any soil, because there was such a thing as a no-till drill, which didn't do any cultivation, but just made a notch in the soil, dropped the seed in, and
I've seen that. It's almost like a blade, and it makes a cut, sort of almost holds the sides apart. The seeds go in, and it just sort of closes over. So that's the method that you started using.
So we got very excited about. I suppose 10 years ago we started no tillage at all, and it was extraordinary, because it saved us so much time and money, because we could have we could get rid of a tractor, and we could get rid of a whole lot of expensive machinery, and we were using something like a third or a quarter of the amount of diesel we were using before, and
of course, so the energy to pull a plough
it's incredibly energy intensive. And we were getting the same yields as we were before. We sort of thought, well, why the hell isn't everybody doing this? This is crazy. It's we were having to use instead of all that ploughing things, we had to go over with a spray to kill the weeds at the time of planting the new crop, to give the new crop a start. So you couldn't do it in an organic way at that time, and it's still incredibly complicated.
So that initially you're using like a sort of Roundup, or that
so
type
it's a dose of Roundup, and which is cost a few pounds an acre as against all the ploughing, and which not only costs money per acre, but it also degrades your soil, because and so for the cost of the Roundup, we found our soils improving. You could almost sort of see it happening, the change in colour, as you said about Neil's farm, and it's.
But Roundup is a pretty controversial chemical these days. Is it possible to do this drill no-till without using Roundup? Because it's been shown to. It has a detrimental effect on the biology of the soil itself. Right?
It does. It's nothing like as detrimental as ploughing, but it is, which is a sort of physical destruction of a sort of cityscape of microbes. Right. It's like whereas it's more like a kind of a pandemic, or it's like a
understand the analogy.
Exactly
the difference between COVID and Hiroshima kind of thing.
Because what we realised having started down this process, I hadn't, I've always been quite keen on looking after our soil, but actually I hadn't realised just how incredible the soil ecosystem is, And as you say, fungicides and Roundup and, all these chemicals and fertilizers do damage all, it's incredibly complex ecosystem, starting with, the sun, the plants taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and making sugars, and they exude that into the soil, which, all the different soil creatures feed on it, and, it's very exciting, and no one, there's a few people investigating it, but no one really understands the full complexity and all the different.
I remember reading somewhere that in a tablespoon of healthy soil, there are more organisms than there are people in the world.
Yeah. Like, I mean, it's bonkers.
Billions and billions and billions. Yeah.
I mean, obviously they're quite small, but but they do an incredibly important job, and so we don't want to hurt them if we possibly can. And so ideally we wouldn't use Roundup, but at the moment Roundup is the cheapest and most effective way of doing it. But there are people experimenting with lots of other ways of farming
without using
cultivating.
I'd be really interested to know about that, because I know that Roundup is, some of the reading I've done around it, I know it's highly controversial, and farmers, it's an incredibly useful tool for farmers, as you just described, to be able to produce food in a way that is minimally disruptive, and yet it has this sort of slightly antibiotic effect.
It is an antibiotic.
And it's very interesting, because Roundup disrupts a pathway within plant metabolism that animals don't have. I forget what it's. Shikimate pathway. I'm sure I'm butchering it.
It's a long time since I did biology level.
That this particular pathway is involved in plant metabolism, not animal metabolism. So the thought was, well, we can spray it on the plants, and it's not affecting animals or humans. But the problem is that it's affecting our gut bacteria, and it's disturbing. So it's a bit like, when you take a course of penicillin, your guts are sort of negatively affected. It's like a low level effect of that. So, I think we really need to try and think of ways of moving away from the use of that stuff, right?
Absolutely, and I think it's even more severe in cases of where they're Roundup ready crops, which luckily we're not allowed to use in this country, but in the US,
GMO crops, right?
The GMO crops, because they're sprayed with Roundup on the growing crop.
Routinely,
so it's getting into the actual seed, which is then fed to chickens and pigs.
Of course. So it ends up in the food chain.
It ends up in the food chain.
Well. I had read that there were detectable levels of Roundup in the Impossible Burger.
I can well believe it.
Because it's come from it's come from that GMO soy that's Roundup ready, as you say. So we've got the situation where. Would you say that these ideas, was this sort of the birth of the idea of regenerative agriculture? One thing we haven't actually done yet is define what regenerative agriculture is. So, we're starting to talk about the beginnings of it, but can you just tell us?
Well, I think we're a little bit behind in this country. I first heard the word sometime, 8 or 9 years ago. I went off to America. They destroyed their soils much more thoroughly in America than we did in this country. They've done a proper job, but because of their climate and we have a benign maritime climate and fairly resilient soils. But in the Midwest of America, they've got the most fantastic deep soils, and from where the bison were roaming for thousands of years, and 6 foot deep black soil, lovely. And Europeans came along and ploughed it up and got some good crops, and then the drought hit and the whole blinking lot blew away, and it was just and so they realised that they had to look after their soils a bit more, and so the sort of no-till farming kind of started over there, and there's a group of farmers in Kansas formed a no-till on the plains, and they have they go around advising each other. But they have a fabulous winter conference, which my wife Joanna and I went over to whenever it was, 8 or 9 years ago, and you've got 1,200 farmers sitting there with their Stetsons, and they were listening to the most extraordinary, exciting talks. I couldn't believe it. There were, the people like Jill Clapperton just explaining, what goes on in the soil and how it all hangs together and how you can farm in a different way. And there were, farmers like Dave Brandt, who's just a genius, who's turned his degraded soil into a soil which isn't recognised by any of the, soil scientists, because this is too good. It's not on the chart, and he doesn't even have any animals. So he's.
I was going to say this is entirely arable, but just doing it in the right way.
And he grows an awful lot of cover crops, and he doesn't grow sort of pure crop of sunflowers. He'll have a kind of chaos of different cover crops all growing together, and bumblebees.
So is it called undercropping? Is it called?
Well, it's kind of companion cropping, And then, but he's just a very good farmer. He worked out, But I sat and chatted to this bloke. I just couldn't get my head around just the astonishing things going on. And then I came across Gabe Brown, who was just at the conference, and I was talking to him, and he's sort of legendary farmer in North Dakota, and he wasn't so legendary then, but he's still a hero of mine. I was so excited to meet him, and he said, there's a lot of talk about sustainability, John. He said, but what's the point of sustaining a system which is fundamentally corrupt, or corrupted? We need to regenerate it. And sustainability. And that was the first time I heard and it just stuck in my head. That's completely brilliant. That's what we've got to do. And the great thing is that farmers are the only people who can do it on a global scale.
Yes, absolutely.
We've got to do it. That's the only way we're going to get out of this mess.
Well, you're looking after most of the land
area.
Exactly.
And it's just crucial that we farmers, we're the new superheroes. We've got to do it. We've got to step up to the mark.
And sometimes you do wear a cape.
And sometimes I put my underpants on the outside of my trousers.
So this was like for you, because I really liked what you said there. It's something I've often said. When we talk about our businesses, that sustainability means not making things any worse.
Exactly.
But
it's a pretty low ambition.
It's too low a benchmark.
Yeah.
So that was the first, 8 or 9 years ago, that was the first time that you became aware of the sort of idea of regenerative agriculture. What I find really interesting though is that a lot of the talk now, when people talk about regenerative agriculture, they tend to talk about beef, cattle, and the ability of animals to put nutrition back in the soil. But for you, because you were also a beef farmer, but for you, it started with arable. And so I think this is a great time to kind of introduce Groundswell, which, we mentioned at the very, very beginning when we started talking, but Groundswell is still very much focused. It's a regenerative agriculture conference, festival, meeting, whatever you call it, but it's still very arable focused, right? So it is absolutely possible to regenerate the soil without animals being in the rotation, or is it better with animals in the rotation? Could you talk a little bit about the toing and froing there?
Well, when was it, six and a half years ago, we had the first show. We just sort of did it without really thinking about it, but we called it the Notill show the first year, and there weren't any animals there, but it was, and we just had lots of these different no-till drills, and we flew Jill Clapperton in, and there were various other really exciting speakers, and it all worked very well. But it was all about the arable, and then the second year, it worked so well before we do it again. The second year, we had 2 days. We had a livestock day, and so with speakers about livestock, and really not really concentrating too much on all the machinery. And then we had the machinery day, because we thought that would, and then there's suddenly thought, of course they've got to come together, because it's no good. There's some farmers who only have livestock, because of where they are, and it was fair enough. And 2/3 of the country isn't suitable 2/3 of the UK isn't suitable for arable farming.
Right, so 2/3 of all the farmland that we have, you couldn't grow crops on even if you wanted to.
Well, I mean, you could probably have a vegetable patch, but you couldn't make a living out of it.
You couldn't do commercial crops.
And the trouble is, in past history, a lot of unsuitable land has been used for growing crops, and it's sort of washed away. Or if you plough a hillside and it rains,
then the whole
your soil ends at the bottom,
right.
And you end up which is what's happened all over the world.
So unsuitability for crops, I'd read somewhere that it's called marginal land, but it's an economic term more often than a physical description. That if you can make crops, correct me if I'm wrong, but crops generally will yield a higher value on a bit of land than animals would. If the land is very good for crops, but if it's not, then there's a tipping point where it's not economically viable, and you can then keep animals on pasture. And it's to do with elevation, elevation changes within the land, as you said, like whether it's going to wash away, you get dry bits and wet bits and all this sort of thing. Is that a sort of physical description what makes land suitable or unsuitable, or?
Well, yeah, and then whether it's too rocky or too, just how good the soil is, I suppose. Okay. And as I say, soil. Well, I mean, what we realised after doing Groundswell for a year or two, and because suddenly, what was such fun doing Groundswell was just being able to, being given license to go and find interesting ideas and bring people along to talk about it.
Yeah.
And it was just blew my mind to find out what people were doing, and people were regenerating soils unbelievably quickly. Like I say about Dave Brandt in Carroll, Ohio, but I mean, people all over the world taking severely degraded soil and making it great again. But it's, whereas we'd always been led to believe it takes 1,000 years to create a centimetre of soil, which is kind of
read that statistic.
Yeah, exactly. Which is sort of true if you're,
leaving it
if the glaciers have just gone away and you've got bare rock and and the lichens or lichens as we now call them, all sort of chewing away at the rock, and it probably would take 1,000 years, but using animal impact and all the things we know about now, we can regenerate our soils fantastically quickly anyway, sorry, going around in circles. I'm leaking about all over this. The coffee.
Have I given you too much? I'm going to take it away. So that's really interesting. I'd also read that 1,000 years to make an inch of soil, and that sort of has led me to another, like a question that I hadn't really thought of before, but something to ask you. There's a lot of talk about like rewilding. So basically, if we've got trashed land that we've over-farmed, leaving it alone and letting nature take care of it, what would be the difference between, so that will eventually regenerate, then nature will take over. But if we've really put a system out of balance, nature needs to refine the balance within that system. Which is going to give a quicker result in terms of restoring soil, which is the most crucial commodity, the most crucial asset that farmers have?
Yeah.
Is it careful regenerative management, or is it just total leave it alone, rewilding, let nature do it? How do the two compare in terms of actually, repairing some of the damage we've done?
Good question. I mean, I don't actually know for sure. All my instincts are saying a well-managed agricultural system will
regenerate quicker.
Will regenerate much quicker. We mob graze our cattle. We put a 4-year herbal lay in our arable rotation now. So you are mixing. So you're using we're mixing now. But so you take one of our degraded arable fields, and rather than we put a mixture of lots of different herbs and grasses in, called a herbal lay, and that'll last for 4 years. And so you've got deep rooting chicory and all sorts of lovely, parsleys and other sort of herbs, as well as lots of clovers and trefoils and grasses, all coming at different times.
This variety, instead of just planting grass.
Nature doesn't do monocultures,
sure.
and the more diversity the bed diversity is basically a good thing. You know,
Yes.
you just almost anyway. You know, just the more things going on, and then because plants look after each other. I mean, it's bizarre. I was watching David Attenborough's new program, The Green Planet. You know, love him to bits. But whoever wrote the script, I mean, it's just extraordinary sort of focus on plants battling each other, you know, and it's a war out there, and this plant's being eaten by that plant, and it was trying to get above that, and actually, you know, nature it's not red in tooth and claw. They're all collaborating with each other as much as anything, and with the mycorrhizal fungi, you know, feeding messages to each other.
Network messages,
yeah. I mean, it's just. And you know, for sure, not everything's going to make it to adulthood, but you know, in its brief moment, and you know, it's going to feed all the other. And the same thing works in the rainforest as it does in one of our fields in a herbal ley. We let it all grow up, and then we put our cattle in for a few hours in a very small area, and they'll eat a fair bit and tread it in, and poo and pee on it, and then we'll go away for a few months, and it'll all grow back up again, and it's that fantastic pulsing energy and carbon into the soil is just phenomenal how quickly.
So the cattle are having a benefit to that, not a detriment. When they come and they eat the grass, it's so counterintuitive to think that could be. But I guess it's a little bit like mowing your lawn, right?
Yeah.
When you mow your lawn, the light goes a bit deeper, and the lawn grows a bit. What's actually happening? Well, I guess, is it a case then that these herbal ley, this pasture, that we're calling it pasture rather than grass, has evolved with grazing animals rather than, I mean, do the two need each other? I mean, obviously the cows need the grass, but does the grass need the cows?
No, big time. I mean, they're finding in, you know, a lot of places that had huge grasslands, right, in the steppes of Russia,
Mongolia,
exactly, and the prairies of North America. If you take the bison away, the grass grows up, nothing eats it, and then it kind of goes brown and oxidizes and evaporates into the, you know, it doesn't, and the whole thing becomes kind of sad and prone to grass fires, and you know, and they think, well, no, we have to manage this with fire, and you're putting all this stuff in the atmosphere, and it's kind of crazy
for no reason,
Whereas
that could be going into a cow.
Get those bison or those cattle in and to eat it. You know, they might burp the odd bit of methane, but then all sorts of processes go on. You know, with it's turned into a sort of science lesson, but you know, there's methane-eating bacteria in the soil which are stimulated by the
methanotrope.
Methanotrope. Good on them. And then there's also, you get a water vapor coming off evapotranspiration from the pasture, which the sunlight interferes with, and you create hydroxyl radicals which eat the methane. You know, so if you're grazing animals, you know, ruminants properly on pasture, you know, methane is kind of irrelevant, and because it's a closed loop cycle. It's a closed loop, exactly, and
it's interesting what you said about the evaporation, because that same time, you know, one of my light bulb moments, it was on those like 30-degree summer days, and the wheat field that was desiccated and ready for harvest was absolutely baking. Of course, you got the reflection from the wheat. And the pasture felt it was 10 degrees cooler because you've got all the transpiration happening and all the evaporation which causes cooling.
And also, I mean, you know, the chlorophyll, it's working away. I mean, it sort of takes heat out of the air. You know, it's all part of the. So we can. And if you walk into a wood, it's even more noticeable effect. I mean, it's just degrees cooler.
Okay, so you kind of talked a bit about like arable, and you've talked a bit about the animal, and how on your farm you've got a 4-year rotation. So what's the rotation of your land then? You said you do 4 years of herbal ley.
Yeah.
So you've planted this on what was previously growing crops,
wheat and barley.
Okay. what happens then? So when does it go back into crop, and what do you have to do to make that happen?
Well, we're experimenting with all sorts of things, but I mean, you know, traditionally, what we did until last couple of years was plant it with spray it off. Well, we'd slot in some wheat, and before it came up, we'd destroy what was left of the cover crop with the herbal lay with Roundup. And then the wheat would grow up, and you know.
So the wheat's already planted, and then you kill off what's on the top, and then the wheat gets.
What we want to do is keep living roots in the ground as much as possible, and it's you know we want to keep these soil creatures as happy as possible, and so and the living roots are the kind of, you know, they're the power stations that kind of keep the whole system.
But is it possible to sort of kill the plant above the ground and not below then?
No, yeah, well it is, but then the below ground bit tends to send up to new shoots. Yeah. I mean, there are very. I mean, it's just
like saying I'll kill you from the waist up.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think, you know, there's some really exciting stuff going on now with Andy Cato's. We're working with him, trying to. He's got the wild farm grain thing, which is about just cultivating a strip 50 centimetres apart.
I'm really hoping to talk to those guys. I've seen what they're doing, and they've made special machinery. So, so you still keep your herbal lay, and you just get these wonderful strips of wheat in the middle. And then come along with a mower and mow the herbal lay in between the things. And you know, I mean, there's problems. And he's using a heritage or, you know, older varieties, because the modern wheats tend to stand sort of 18 inches tall, and they have a huge great ear, which is, you know, pumped full of sort of carbohydrates, but actually, you know, nutrient wise not quite so interesting as some of the older ones. You know. Loads of starch, less protein.
They're incredibly good at doing what they do, which is producing a high yield, but not necessarily feeding people that well. But it's the heritage wheats, you know, tend to, because they're taller, they tend to have deeper roots, and so they've got access to more minerals and things deeper down. And they can outcompete the weeds to a large extent.
I've got you, because they're
so it's very much work in progress, and, you know, Andy's been doing this in France some time, and he's got it working well there. We're in a different climate here, and so, you know, we're all, but he's got farmers all over the country, so we're experimenting, and I think it's very exciting. But it's just an exciting time to be farming, because there's so many of these sort of things going on. You know, people trying new ways of doing it, and it's particularly exciting because it's, you know, it does away with the need for Roundup, you know, and effectively we can have,
because we have to get away from that stuff, right?
Exactly. But you know, you've got your thing, and your herbal lay is still there, you know, and then you can come along with your combine, harvest your wheat, and then let the animals back on to keep the whole system going.
So you're not keeping them like
so
for 4 years and 4 years.
Exactly, and so you've got a fantastic diversity of things going on all the time. And
so the same land within the same year is producing both bread and meat in a sense.
Exactly.
Incredible. I mean, because I've always thought that, you know, within you said it earlier, there are no monocrops in nature, but there are also no isolated systems where plants and animals exist in isolation in nature either. So, I mean, what you've just described sounds like an incredibly brilliant, diverse way that we can produce food on, you know.
Well, if you look at an old meadow, I mean, we've got some meadows probably haven't been ploughed for 600 years at least, and it's but there's always quite a lot going on, and you know, you don't really get bare soil in nature, but you do get the odd molehill or an anthill, and ants are just extraordinary what they do. You know, they're kind of engineers, and they're farming aphids and doing all sorts of weird things.
We're not the only animals that farm, are we?
We're not the only animals that farm, but they're also creating bare soil. And the thing about most of the arable crops we grow are annuals, and they're weeds, and they need kind of bare soil to get going, or, you know, need us to put the seed in the ground and give them a chance to go. But it's so you've got anthills and molehills, and so there will be a permanent pasture with annual weeds growing in amongst them, you know. And so if we can look at nature for good ideas about how to farm, because Mother Nature's been doing it for
longer than we have,
and millions a year, and we think we're so clever because we've been doing it since the 1950s. It's like biomimicry. It's just
biomimicry.
Yeah,
okay, that's a great term.
Yeah. Well, I mean, engineers use it when they're designing plane wings, or they'll look at birds, or I mean, it's a nature. Who's got so many of the answers, so you just have to kind of open your eyes wide enough to see what Mother Nature's up to, and then...
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So that's where this sort of whole thought process is leading to, is this idea of biomimicry. So I think we better start kind of wrapping this up a bit now. But there was
sorry, it's a big subject.
We could talk all day. But one of the things that I said I wanted to talk to you about before we started the interview when we were next door is that the last couple of Groundswell festivals that I've been to, agricultural conference meetings, I came away with a bit of a sense that there is a disconnect between the farmers and food, and I was wondering what your thoughts were on how we could possibly bridge that gap, because I got the impression that a lot of particularly arable farmers had almost forgotten that they were producing food, and yet the people at your conference, in my opinion, are producing the finest quality ingredients available in the UK. But to them, it's a bit of a commodity, and I see the real change in this movement happening when chefs connect with farmers, and also chefs are treating their ingredients a lot like commodities. Not all, I know there's huge variation, but a lot of the time it's quality price. There's little thought as to provenance and impact. But more and more chefs now are starting to contact us as a business and say, we're actually interested in impact. We want to know impact. Can you see a time where we could maybe combine Taste of London with Groundswell Festival and sort of bring these two tribes together, or do you think it needs to? What are your thoughts on this idea?
I think that's a brilliant idea. I mean, I think you're right. We certainly we thought we were producing thousands of tons of wheat, and all we were interested in were the numbers that we were given. Oh, your protein's at 11.3. There needs to be 12 if we're going to get the top price. Oh, we've got to get more. We've got to get, and that basically meant putting more fertilizer on to get to magic figure. And if you talk to a baker, they just say, "Well, hang on, what are you on about? That's not what I'm looking for. I want a wheat that produces nice tasting bread. And it's I think, we're not very good in this country. We've got a reputation for not being that interested in food, and to see what passes as food in some places, it's justifiable.
I'm always blown away by you go to driving across France, and you pull over at a service station which is on a motorway, and it will have local produce, and you think, hang on, this has come from that farm 4 kilometres away, and yet it's still got the mass-produced, Paul group sandwiches or whatever, but you can buy local honey or jam or flour or whatever. And
well, the whole Michelin thing was, Michelin make tyres, and their guides were for lorry drivers, to where to get the best, roadside snacks or food, and it's it's part of their culture, or nor does Italians and the Spanish.
How come? But in terms also of this new movement of regenerative agriculture, do you think there's a Do you see it as your job as a farmer to educate the public or the chefs or the food buyers, or how do you think we can draw the decision makers into the world that you're involved with?
No, I don't really think it's my job, but I do.
You've got enough on.
No, but interesting. I do love the idea of making things better, or just making it easier for things to get better, and I think it's been very nice. I mean, we are getting more foodies along, you know,
Okay.
and but I think it would be, we perhaps ought to have some kind of dating service, you know,
to bring together farmers and chefs.
Exactly.
No, I'd love to do. I'd love to help with that.
But
No, that'd be amazing. I personally would love to start. I'd love to think that this year, Groundswell, 22nd, 23rd of June. That we could invite the chefs that we work with and say, come and see the wiring under the board, if you like, or under the. We'll lift the hood for you. You can see how all this is driven a bit.
Well, there's because there's some people doing extraordinary things, and they kind of need. Yeah, they want cheering up. They want
recognition.
It'd be nice to have a market for what they're producing. I mean, it's slightly agonising with our cattle when we, produce something. It's the best it could be, and the whole pasture-fed thing. We don't feed our cattle anything they wouldn't eat naturally, and there's no.
We wouldn't buy your beef.
Exactly, you wouldn't. But it's you're not sort of preaching to convert here. But I mean, the whole business of grain and stuff, which makes them grow faster, and we're advised that's what we've got to do. But it's we do all this stuff, and it disappears off into some of it just disappears off into the supermarket. I hope that someone's in Morrison's and buys one of our steaks and thinks, my lord, that's so much better than that. Exactly. But it's
So the trouble is, there's a tip, everyone. You could get lucky at Morrison's. You never know.
You've got to buy the premium one. Yes, it's anyway. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a pretty good wrap up. So, Groundswell is this year 22nd, 23rd of June. Where is it?
On our farm in North Hertfordshire. Lanark Manor Farm,
it's very much open to anyone interested, the public, farmers.
Well, it is. I mean, we tried.
Cook chefs.
We called it originally "By Farmers for Farmers" because so many of these shows are put on by the industry to sell things to farmers, and we didn't want to sell anything apart from ideas to people. And but there's so many exciting ideas there, and I think it will appeal to chefs or conservationists, people who are just worried about the biodiversity. I mean, because the other exciting thing about this way of farming is just how many more birds and animals we have on a farm.
No, and I can certainly attest to that, having been to a couple of groundswells. I may not wander into a discussion on plow blade shapes, but I would go into one talking about soil microbes or how to. The role of fungus in farming and things like that. It's some absolutely fascinating talks. And then, of course, there were a few cooks and chefs coming in talking about the difference in quality of ingredients that you guys are producing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John.
Thanks for having me.
We've literally gone around the world there. And it's been really great to
well done you with this.
An insight.
Regenuary. Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you.